Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 11 deeply unsettling stories from people who stopped at truck rest stops across the country. Those lonely stretches of pavement that sit just far enough off the highway to feel forgotten by the world. These are accounts from drivers, travelers, and people who simply needed a place to sleep for a few hours, who found something waiting for them in the dark that no one warned them about. Get comfortable, keep the lights on if you need to, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Like and subscribe so you never miss a story. Story 1. There's a rest stop on I-84 in eastern Oregon that I drove past probably 40 times before I ever actually pulled in. You know the kind, the ones that look like they were built in the 70s and haven't been touched since. Just a couple of concrete block bathrooms and a few picnic tables with peeling paint, sitting alone in the high desert like something forgotten. The land out there is so flat and so dark at night that the stars feel wrong, like they're too close. I used to drive that stretch for a trucking company out of Boise, hauling frozen goods west, and that particular rest stop always sat at the back of my mind as a place I'd use in an emergency. The emergency came in late October. I think it was a Thursday, maybe a Friday. The days blur together on long hauls. But I remember the cold was sharper than usual. That dry desert cold that gets under your jacket before you notice it. I'd been driving since 2 in the afternoon and my eyes were doing that thing where they stay open but stop working. My thermos was empty. I'd eaten a gas station burrito somewhere around Caldwell that I was already regretting. I pulled in around 2 in the morning, just me and one other rig parked at the far end, a flatbed with tarps I didn't pay much attention to. I sat in the cab for a while with the engine running. The overhead light was out, which I noticed but didn't think much about. One of the picnic tables had tipped over on its side. A paper bag was pinned against the chain link fence at the edge of the lot, just shaking back and forth in the wind. Normal rest stop decay. I was too tired to care. I set an alarm for 4:30, turned the engine off, pulled my jacket over me and went to sleep in the seat. I woke up once around 3 because of a smell. That's not an exaggeration, the smell woke me up. It was like something wet and electric, almost like a breaker box that'd been rained on. I looked around the lot and everything looked the same as before. The flatbed was still there. The lights on the concrete bathroom building were humming like they do. I cracked the window a little, decided the smell was probably a skunk or something dead in the scrub brush, and went back to sleep. The second time I woke up, it wasn't a smell. Something had pressed against the passenger side window. Not knocked, pressed. There was a sound like wet rubber dragging slowly across the glass from bottom to top, and by the time my brain was awake enough to register what I was hearing, it was already done. I sat up and looked at the window, and there was a smear on the outside of it. Long, going from the bottom edge to the top in a single, slow stroke. The smear wasn't from a hand. It was too wide and the mark didn't have finger lines in it. It was flat and blurred, like something had leaned its whole forearm across the glass. I told myself a drunk guy wandered through the lot. I told myself maybe the other trucker had come past on his way to the bathroom and bumped the mirror housing and grazed the window. I was very committed to those explanations for about 30 seconds until I looked at the lot and realized the flatbed was gone. I hadn't heard an engine. I hadn't heard a truck door, hadn't heard exhaust, hadn't heard gravel move. It was just gone. I started my engine. Before I could get out of park, something stood up from the far side of the bathroom building. Not came around from behind it, stood up, like it had been crouching there against the wall the whole time. I only saw it for a second in my headlights when I swung them around. Tall, that much was obvious, taller than the doorframe of the bathroom, which I later measured in the daylight at 8 feet. It was pale in a way that looked almost gray under the headlights, and its arms were down at its sides, hanging, and the way they hung was wrong. Like the elbows were in the right place but bent the wrong direction, so the forearms angled back instead of forward. It was just standing there, looking at the truck. And then I was pulling out, and the last thing my headlights crossed over was the bathroom wall where it had been crouching, and there were marks on the concrete. Long, horizontal scrape marks at about waist height, like something had been pressed flat against that wall for a long time. I drove to a gas station about 12 miles west and sat in the parking lot until sunrise. When I got home, I pulled my jacket out of the cab and found a single pale smear on the sleeve, the same kind as the one on the window, that I hadn't put there. I've never been able to figure out when it happened. I still drive that route, I just don't stop anymore. Story 2. My sister Valentina is the one who actually pushed me to tell this story. She says I've been holding on to it for too long and that talking about it might help, which I appreciate the thought, Val, but I'm not sure talking about it does anything except make me remember it more clearly. And I don't need help with that. This was about 6 years ago, the summer I was doing long-distance driving for the first time, freelancing between jobs. I had a cargo van, not a semi, and I was picking up whatever contracts I could find: furniture, landscaping supplies, once a whole pallet of taxidermy molds that I did not examine closely. I was passing through western Missouri on a 2-day haul when I stopped at a rest area off I-70, one of the bigger ones with an actual lit parking structure and a vending machine bank and a little grass strip with a walking path. It was about 9 at night. Still warm, humid in that Missouri summer way where the air feels like it has texture. I parked in the lot, bought a coffee from the vending machine, terrible coffee, the powder kind that goes in those little cups that are never the right size for anything, and walked the grass strip a couple of times to stretch. There was a family with a dog at one of the picnic tables, 2 or 3 other vehicles in the lot, a guy eating at a table alone with earbuds in. Completely normal. The dog kept pulling toward the tree line at the far end of the grass, which the woman holding the leash kept laughing about. I noticed it and I thought, that's a funny dog, and that was it. I got back in the van around 9:30, ate a sandwich I'd packed, scrolled my phone for a while. The family left. The guy with the earbuds left. At some point I noticed the lights in the lot seemed dimmer than they had been, but the fixtures were old, so I figured they were just flickering out. I put my seat back and closed my eyes around 10:15. I don't know exactly when I heard the sound. It was coming from outside and to my right from the direction of the tree line, and it was okay. This is the part that's hard to describe without sounding like I imagined it. It was knocking. Slow, methodical knocking, like someone rapping their knuckles on a hollow door coming from somewhere in the trees. One knock, pause, one knock, pause, like a metronome. I sat up, listened. It went on for probably 2 full minutes and the spacing never changed, not even slightly, always the same beat between strikes. I told myself it was a woodpecker. I know that's stupid, it was 10 at night, but that's what I told myself. Then it stopped for maybe 30 seconds and started again, except now it was closer. And now there were 2. The same rhythm but slightly offset from each other, like they were communicating. I turned the dome light on and rolled the window down a crack and looked toward the tree line. The parking lot was empty. The grass strip was empty. The walking path lamps threw yellow circles on the pavement that didn't reach the trees. I couldn't see anything, but the knocking kept going, and now I could tell that it wasn't coming from inside the trees. It was coming from the edge just past where the lamp light died. I should have just locked the doors and ignored it. Instead, and I genuinely do know why I did this, I got out of the van. I walked to the edge of the lamplight and stopped there, and I stood and looked into the dark tree line for maybe 20 seconds. There were 2 of them. I say 2 because I could see 2 sets of pale shapes in the dark, not figures exactly, more like patches where the darkness was less dark. They were standing very still. And then one of them moved its arm, and I heard a single knock, and I understood that the knocking sound had been them, and that their arms were long enough that they could strike a tree trunk while standing what looked like 10 feet away from it. One of them tilted what must have been its head. I saw the silhouette of it shift, slow and smooth. I walked backward to the van, got in, locked the doors, drove away without looking in the mirrors. In the morning when I stopped for gas, I found 2 things on the roof of the van: a smear of dark mud and a long thin streak like someone had laid a finger down lengthwise. And next to it, pressed flat against the roof, a small Y-shaped branch stripped completely of bark. Something had been up there. Riding maybe, or checking. I reported none of it to anyone. What would I have said? Story 3. I want to say up front that I'm a skeptic. Was a skeptic. I grew up in a house where my dad used to make a point of explaining every strange noise and every weird coincidence until it made boring logical sense. And I inherited that, I think, as a kind of default setting. So when I tell you what happened to me at a rest stop in central Nevada, I want you to understand that I spent a significant amount of time trying to logic my way out of it, and I failed. This was in March 4 years ago. I was driving from Salt Lake City to Reno to help my college roommate Dimitri move into a new apartment. It was a long, stupid drive across some of the most empty landscape in the country, That stretch of Nevada on I-80 where you can go 40 miles between anything and the radio doesn't pick up. I hit a rest stop about an hour east of Elko around midnight. Small place. One other car, a sedan with a cracked back windshield, parked at the far end. Bathroom building, 2 picnic tables, a historical marker about something I didn't stop to read. I used the bathroom and came back out and ate a granola bar sitting on the hood of my car looking up. The stars out there are genuinely unreal. You don't get that in Salt Lake. I spent maybe 10 minutes doing nothing but sitting and looking up, which I never do, and which I was happy I'd done. I remember thinking it was a good stop and I'd have to remember the name of it so I could pull in again on the way back. I got back in the car, and that's when I noticed the historical marker more carefully. There was a figure standing next to it. I told myself immediately that it was the driver of the sedan, just stretching, reading the sign. The sedan was 20 feet away at least. It could have been them. I watched the figure for a moment, and it didn't move. And then I decided I just couldn't see movement clearly at this distance in the dark, and I started the car. My headlights swept across the marker when I backed out. No one was there. I pulled up closer, rolled the window down, looked at the area around the marker. Nothing. I looked over at the sedan and it was still parked and still. I did a slow full circle around the lot, headlights sweeping, and I didn't see a person anywhere. I checked myself. I was tired, but not that tired. I'd seen a figure. I looked away for the 2 seconds it took to start the car, and it was gone. I drove to the sedan and stopped with my lights pointing at it. Empty inside. No one sitting in it, no one lying across the back seat. The crack in the windshield made a long shadow. I sat there for a while feeling stupid and alert at the same time. Then from somewhere behind me I heard a woman say my name. Not a voice that sounded like my name by coincidence, not a sound that I interpreted as my name because I was spooked. My name. The right pronunciation, the right cadence, said the way my mother says it, gently like she does when she's about to ask me a favor. I spun around and there was nothing outside the rear window. The lot was empty. The picnic tables were empty. The bathroom door was closed. I drove fast, which was stupid given the road, but I drove. I've turned this over in my head probably 1,000 times. The only explanation I've ever been able to generate that halfway works is acoustic weirdness. That some truck passing on the highway a mile south carried a woman's voice at just the right angle. It's thin. I know it's thin. What I know doesn't work at all is that when I reached Elko and stopped at a gas station and got out, I found the passenger side door handle of my car bent downward at about a 45-degree angle. The handle I never use because it sticks from the inside and I always go around to the driver's side. Someone or something had tried to open that door while the car was moving. Dimitri believed me. Dimitri helped me replace the handle without asking too many questions. We don't talk about it anymore. Story 4. The year I turned 30, my wife Priya and I did a cross-country drive, which is the kind of thing you do when you turn 30 because you tell yourself it'll be romantic, and then it's mostly just disagreeing about podcasts and eating too many Pringles. We went from Chicago to the coast, drove back through the South. The whole thing was about 3 weeks. It was good. Most of it was genuinely good. I bought a bandana in Santa Fe that I still have. Priya found a vintage spoon in a junk shop in Flagstaff that she talked about for the rest of the trip. The rest stop where things went wrong was in East Texas, late on the second to last night of the drive. It was hot, even at midnight in October. East Texas is unreasonably warm, and we'd been driving since noon. Neither of us wanted to stop, but the next town with a motel was another 90 minutes out, and we'd made a deal at the start of the trip that if either one of us said they were too tired to drive safely, we'd pull over, no argument. Priya said it. We pulled over. The rest stop was on Highway 59, north of Livingston. It had a covered area with picnic tables and a string of fluorescent lights, most of them working. Big old trees on 3 sides, the highway on the 4th. Surprisingly nice for the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. We reclined the seats and opened the windows a couple of inches because of the heat and fell asleep within 10 minutes of parking. I woke up to Priya grabbing my arm. She wasn't making a sound, which told me she'd been awake for a while and was already past the stage of making sounds. I opened my eyes and she pointed slowly through the windshield. There was a woman standing under the covered area, standing between 2 of the picnic tables facing our car. She was wearing a pale dress and had long hair down, and from where we were maybe 60 feet away, she looked completely normal. A traveler maybe who'd gotten here while we were asleep, maybe having car trouble. I started to sit up to wave just out of instinct, and Priya dug her fingers into my arm and shook her head. I looked back at the woman and I understood then what Priya had already understood, which was that the woman hadn't moved at all, not shifted her weight, not looked away. She was just standing there facing our car, and she had been, Priya said later, for at least 15 minutes. We sat very still. I didn't want to start the car because I didn't want the engine sound to draw attention to us, which I realize makes no sense since she was already looking directly at us, but rationality wasn't running the show at that point. The woman moved. She raised one arm slowly, and pointed. Not at us, past us. I turned to look through the rear window and there was nothing there, just the parking lot and the highway, and when I turned back around she had taken one step toward the car. One step, slow and deliberate, and then she went completely still again. Priya started the car. I will be grateful for that for the rest of my life because I had frozen. We pulled out of the lot and I watched in the side mirror as we went. The woman stood there watching us leave, and she didn't move, and the last thing I saw before we rounded the curve back to the highway was her lowering her arm slowly back to her side. We drove the 90 minutes to the motel in absolute silence. When we got in the room, I found that the string on the back of my shirt, the little loop that goes on the hanger, that loop had been cut. Cleanly, like with scissors. I hadn't taken my shirt off. I'd been sleeping in it. Something had cut that loop while I slept with the window cracked open. And I cannot tell you why that scared me more than the woman in the field. I think it was because it was so small, so careful, so deliberate. Whatever it was, it could have done anything. It cut one small loop and left. We got home the next day. Priya has never driven through Texas again. Story 5. Okay, so I need to explain what I was doing out there, because otherwise the whole thing sounds irresponsible. And I mean, it was irresponsible, but there were reasons. I was 29, working as a freelance sound engineer, and I had a gig fall through at the last minute that left me with 2 weeks of nothing and a van full of recording equipment. I'd been reading about field recording, capturing ambient sound in unusual environments, and I thought, why not? I drove north from Minneapolis, up through the Iron Range, and ended up at a rest stop about 20 miles south of the Canadian border that was technically a rest stop, but really was just a turnout with a single portable bathroom and a picnic table on a gravel pad. I'd stopped there before on a road trip and remembered it was quiet, good signal isolation. I got there around 3 in the afternoon, set up a pair of microphones on stands about 20 feet out from the van, put on my headphones, and spent about 2 hours just recording. Wind in the trees, distant traffic, a bird I couldn't identify, the ticking of the van's engine cooling down. Good, usable stuff. I ate a late lunch, took a walk down the shoulder, came back and pulled the mics in for the night. I slept in the back of the van. I had a sleeping bag and a foam pad and a book I was about 40 pages into, something about the history of polar exploration that I can't remember the title of now. I read until about 10, fell asleep, woke up at some point in the dark and heard the recording equipment. I'd left one unit running, just the onboard microphone on the recorder itself, sitting on the passenger seat. I sometimes leave it running overnight to catch interesting ambient sound. I heard it because I'd also left the monitor output on low. And what was coming through the tiny speaker was not wind or traffic. It was breathing. Slow, measured breathing very close to the microphone. And under it, barely audible, a sound like someone humming, not a melody, just a low continuous tone that rose and fell slightly like the way someone hums to themselves without realizing it when they're focused on a task. I lay completely still. The van was locked. The windows were closed. Whatever was making that sound was outside, very close to the passenger side window where the recorder was sitting on the seat. I reached up slowly and turned the monitor off. The little click it made seemed enormous in the silence of the van. Then there was nothing to hear except what was actually outside, which was nothing, just quiet. I made myself wait 10 minutes. The whole 10 minutes I was thinking about the microphone still running, still picking up whatever was out there, and I kept telling myself that was valuable data. That was exactly what the trip was for, and I also kept thinking that I really didn't want to hear what it had been recording when I played it back. In the morning, everything outside was normal. I packed up quickly. I left the recorder running until the last second and then packed it with everything else and drove to a diner in the nearest town and ate breakfast, and then sat in the parking lot and listened to the overnight recording. The breathing was on there, about 40 minutes of it with occasional gaps, and the humming, which went on longer than the breathing and was louder than I'd thought, like something pressing its face very close to the recorder's microphone. And then near the end, a sound I still can't categorize. Like two flat objects being struck together once very loud directly against the passenger window, the impact of it, and then nothing. The window had no mark on it, but the passenger side mirror, which folds in from outside, was folded all the way against the door when I went to leave. I always keep it extended. I never touched it. Something had pressed against that side of the van in the night, pressing hard enough to fold the mirror. I still have the recording. I've never shared it. I'm not sure I should. Story 6. My grandfather drove trucks for 30 years, and he used to say there were two kinds of rest stops. The ones that wanted you to stay and the ones that wanted you gone. He said you could tell the difference within 5 minutes of pulling in. I thought he was being poetic. I was in my early 20s, driving my own routes for the first time, and I figured experience had made him superstitious the way it does some people, and I'd be smarter about it. This was on I-40 in New Mexico, the stretch between Albuquerque and Amarillo, where the land gets so flat you start to feel slightly insane after an hour. I pulled into a rest stop around midnight, bigger than average, 2 bathroom buildings, a dog walk area with a couple of wooden posts, a little cluster of trees planted on the median that looked recent and looked wrong in the middle of all that desert flatness. There were 3 other vehicles. A camper van at one end, a car with a bike rack, and a box truck I recognized as being from the same company I worked for, though I didn't know the driver. I used the bathroom, bought a water from the machine. The machine ate my dollar and gave me nothing, and I stood there slapping it for a second before giving up and went back to sit in the cab. I remember checking my phone. I remember the camper van had a small light on inside, and I could see a shadow moving behind the curtain. Normal things. I wasn't uneasy. If anything, I was annoyed about the dollar. I noticed the trees after about 20 minutes. They were planted in a line, maybe 8 trees total, none of them tall enough yet to provide shade. Scrubby desert-adapted things, and the thing I noticed was that all of them were leaning. Not from wind, there wasn't much wind, but inward, toward each other, their thin trunks curved so that the tops nearly touched. Like they'd been planted upright and then pulled toward some central point over time. I told myself the soil settled wrong. Desert soil, bad drainage, the trees leaned to compete for water or something. I had 2 years of a biology degree before I dropped out, so I had just enough knowledge to generate plausible-sounding nonsense. Then I noticed the shape in the middle of the leaning trees. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was looking at. The trees had grown in a ring around something. Something was crouching in the center of that ring of bent, inward-leaning trees, and it was large and it was pale. I could only see it because I was parked at an angle that let my cab light catch it. It was crouched down, arms folded in a posture that looked almost peaceful, resting. I stared at it for a long time, long enough for the shape to resolve into details I did not want. The back of it was toward me. The skin was pale and uniformly smooth, the way things are smooth when they shouldn't be, and the spine was visible, not grotesquely, not broken, just very pronounced, like the skin was too thin or the spine too large. The head was down, resting on the folded arms. And then the camper van next to the trees turned its interior light off. The shape's head came up. It didn't turn to look at the van. It turned to look directly at my truck. I drove. I went past the camper van on my way out, and I told myself to stop and warn whoever was in there. I told myself for about 6 miles that I should turn around, and I didn't. I didn't turn around. I have thought about that every time this comes back to me, which is often. In the morning, I stopped at a gas station, and when I climbed down from the cab, I saw that the wooden side paneling on the passenger side of my truck, the running board trim, 3 feet of it, starting from just behind the door, had been scraped down to bare wood. Long parallel scratches, deep, like something with very rigid fingers had dragged them down the side of my truck from that height, which would mean it had been on the running board, which would mean it had been on my truck when I was driving. I called my grandfather that morning. First time I'd called him just to talk in maybe 2 years. I didn't tell him what happened. We just talked. Story 7. I've hiked in bear country, I've done overnight trips alone in the Cascades. I once got stuck in a whiteout on a ridge in Colorado for about 6 hours and had to build a snow shelter out of nothing. I'm telling you this not to brag, but to establish that I'm not someone who panics easily. I've been in situations that felt genuinely dangerous, and I stayed calm and I made good decisions. So when I tell you that what happened at a rest stop in rural Oregon made me feel the specific kind of fear where your body makes decisions before your brain signs off, I want you to understand the weight of that. I was driving down from a hiking trip in the Wallowas with my friend Cleo. This was in mid-September, the year I was 34. Cleo and I had been hiking partners for about 6 years. We met through a trail running club and were the kind of friends who can drive 4 hours in almost total silence, and it's not weird. She was asleep in the passenger seat with a jacket over her face. I was running on fumes and a lot of gas station iced tea. We were maybe 2 hours east of Portland when I pulled off at a rest stop. The rest stop was well maintained. That's the thing I remember first. It was nicer than average, with new fixtures and actual landscaping, and there were several other vehicles parked there, so I felt fine. I didn't wake Cleo. I parked, put the hazards on for a second out of habit, then turned them off and went to use the restroom. The restrooms were in a building set about 50 yards from the main parking area down a lit path. I went in, did what I needed to do, started washing my hands, and looked in the mirror. There was someone in the stall behind me. The stall door was closed and the occupied indicator was red, so I hadn't looked closely. But in the mirror I could see the gap under the stall door and there were feet visible. That's normal, except the feet were facing the wrong way. Facing the door, toes pointing toward me, which in a toilet stall means either someone standing backward over the seat or something else. I stared at the gap for a second and the feet didn't move. I can describe the shoes. They were work boots, brown leather, laced up, worn at the toe. They were completely still. I shut the water off and left. I walked back up the path toward the parking area and I was maybe halfway there when I heard the restroom door open behind me. I didn't turn around. I kept walking at exactly the same pace because some part of me understood that changing my pace would be a mistake, and I got back to the car and got in and started it. Cleo stirred. "We going?" "Yeah," I said. I pulled out of the spot, and as I turned toward the exit, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, at the edge of the lamplight where the landscaping bushes started. Wearing work boots, standing still, watching the car. And the figure's arms, I only saw this because my headlights crossed it for 1 second. The figure's arms were both raised, not in a threatening way, not reaching for anything, but raised out to the sides like a scarecrow, completely level with the shoulders. Not moving, just raised and still. Cleo looked up and saw it and said nothing for a long moment, and then, "That's weird." "Yeah," I said. We drove. We got coffee 40 miles later and talked about everything except what we'd seen. Cleo texted me a week later. She said she'd been having dreams about it. I wrote back that I had too, which was true. Neither of us mentioned the work boots. Neither of us mentioned the raised arms. We both knew we'd seen the same thing. The proof for me came when I unpacked my hiking pack 2 days after getting home. At the very bottom, under everything, under my sleeping bag stuffed sack, under my food bag, there was a single work boot lace, unknotted, dirty, about 14 inches long. I hadn't packed it. I hadn't seen it before. I don't own brown work boots. Story 8. Let me tell you about the summer I drove Route 2 across the top of Montana, because it's not the kind of thing that gets its own chapter in the adventure stories people tell about that state, but it should. I was 27 and doing something I'm not totally sure how to categorize. Not a road trip, exactly, more like I was between places in a literal sense. I'd left a job in Minneapolis. I was heading to stay with my Aunt Georgina in Missoula while I figured out next steps. I had a car packed with most of what I owned in no particular schedule. Route 2 is the northern route, up near the High Line, and it's empty in a way that feels specifically vast. Big sky, grain elevators, small towns with one bar and one church and not much else. I liked it. I put on music and I liked it. The rest stop where everything went sideways was one I almost didn't see. Just a sign and a gravel pullout with a single pit toilet and a trash can chained to a post. But I'd been driving since 6 in the morning and it was now about 10 at night and I had to stop. There were no other cars. The pit toilet smelled exactly how you'd expect. I didn't linger. I got back in the car and I was eating trail mix and reading my road atlas. I use paper maps, it's a thing I do. My phone had no signal anyway, and after about 15 minutes I heard something on the roof of the car. A footstep. I know how that sounds. I know how certain I have to be to say it that plainly. I'm saying it because there's no other word for it. A single heavy impact on the roof above my head from the center of the roof toward the back. Like something had landed, or stepped. I sat completely still. My atlas was still open in my lap. I could hear crickets outside. After maybe a minute of silence, the car dipped very slightly, the way it does when someone sits on the trunk, and the impact sound moved slowly, one step at a time, from the center of the roof toward the front, directly over my head. Slow, deliberate, moving forward. I want to be clear, I was inside a car on an empty gravel pullout in northern Montana at 10 at night, and something was walking across the roof of my car. I did not move. I breathed in very small, shallow amounts. The footsteps stopped directly over the driver's side at the front of the roof, over my head. Nothing moved for a very long time. Then a hand, I'm saying hand because it was the shape of a hand, pressed flat against the windshield from outside, from the top, fingers coming over the edge of the glass and pressing down. Not scrabbling or clawing, pressing. The way you press your hand flat against something to confirm it's real. The fingers were too long and too thin, and there were too many of them. Not by one, not by a little, but unmistakably more than 5, spaced in a way that didn't correspond to any anatomy I know. I started the car. The engine caught and the headlights came on and the hand pulled back instantly, and I heard one impact as something left the roof, and then I was driving, and I didn't stop until I reached a town with a lit gas station, which took 22 minutes. When I got to my aunt's house the next day, she came out to help me unpack and stopped at the front of the car and asked me what happened to my hood. There were 5 dents in the hood, just forward of the windshield. Deep, round dents pressed in from above. Too far forward and too deep to have come from landing debris. The shape of the dents was exactly the spacing of those fingers. My aunt didn't ask any other questions. She just made tea and didn't push when I said I was tired. I've driven Route 2-3 times since then, but I've never stopped at that pullout again. Story 9. There are certain places that feel like they've been waiting. I know that doesn't make literal sense, but I think anyone who's driven enough remote highway has felt it. Pulling into a parking lot or a clearing, and having the immediate sensation that the place was empty 1 second before you arrived and will be empty again 1 second after you leave, and your presence in it is tolerated at best. I'm Rowan, and I used to feel that kind of thing and brush past it. I was a practical person. I kept a very tidy car and a very tidy budget, and I didn't spend much time on feelings that weren't actionable. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand how much had to happen to change that. I was driving from Denver to my cousin Felicity's wedding in Seattle, which I'd been putting off booking flights for until the tickets became absurd, which is how I ended up doing a solo drive across 3 states in early November. It was cold. I-84 through Idaho was fine but long, and by the time I crossed into Oregon, I was ready to stop for the night. I pulled into a rest area just west of Ontario, Oregon at around 11 p.m. Medium-sized rest area. 2 bathroom buildings, an RV hookup section that was empty, a long row of spots with lighting that was better on one end than the other. I parked at the bright end. There was a semi parked at the far end, engine idling and nothing else. I ate the rest of a bag of pretzels, drank some water, read a little, fell asleep. What woke me up I'd describe as pressure rather than sound. Like the air inside the car had gotten heavier. My ears popped. I opened my eyes and the car windows had fogged up, all of them completely, though it hadn't been cold enough inside for that when I went to sleep. I sat up and wiped the driver's side window with my sleeve and looked out. Someone was standing just at the edge of my headlight range. The headlights had been off, I hadn't turned them on, which meant the figure was in the reach of the parking lot lights. It was a person, upright, facing my car, from the shape of it a person of average height, but standing in a way that was slightly off, the way a person stands when they're fighting the urge to move, shoulders too rigid, too controlled. I waited. It didn't move. I turned my headlights on. The figure was a woman. Or it had a woman's shape, the hair, the clothing, the proportions. And it was maybe 30 feet from my car, and it was looking directly at me with no expression at all. The headlights were in its face and its eyes didn't react. Didn't squint, didn't blink, just held. And then slowly it smiled. The smile spread wider than a smile should, and it didn't stop when it reached the corners of its mouth. It kept going, pulling the lower half of the face into something that moved through pleasing and into wrong within about 1 second. I put the car in reverse. My hands were shaking badly enough that I almost knocked the gearshift past reverse into neutral, but I got it and I backed out of the spot fast. The figure watched me go. It didn't follow. It stood there with that expression and watched. I didn't go back to check the semi-driver. I've thought about that. I hoped that idling engine meant they were awake. I hoped that. The evidence. When I reached Portland the next morning and stopped at a rest stop to use the bathroom, I looked in the bathroom mirror and found that my shirt collar, the inside of the collar against my neck, was wet. Not damp. Wet like someone had breathed on it for a long time from very close. I'd been asleep when the fogging started. I'd been asleep. I haven't slept in a car alone since. Story 10. My dad drove truck for 15 years and he used to call certain stretches of highway no-name road, places that existed on maps but didn't feel like they existed in any other sense. He'd say, "You don't linger on no-name road," and I used to roll my eyes at him the way you do. I was 23 and I thought I knew what fear was. I'm Joaquin and I work in agricultural transport, been doing it 8 years now. That stretch of Highway 97 in central Oregon is one I know well, lava fields on either side for miles, high desert, the kind of darkness at night that seems physically present rather than just the absence of light. There's a rest area about 40 miles south of Bend that sits right at the edge of where the lava rock gets closest to the road, close enough that you can see the tumbled black rock from the parking spots. I stopped there on a night in late August, maybe 4 years back. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd just come from a job that ran long and I'd had to call my girlfriend Marisol to say I wouldn't make dinner, and she'd taken it better than I deserved. I parked, stretched, sat on a picnic table for a while looking at the lava field in the dark. There was one other truck at the far end. The air smelled like dust and something faintly sulfurous, which I knew was just the volcanic geology but which always makes me vaguely uneasy in the same way elevator music makes me uneasy. A background wrongness I can never fully ignore. I went back to the cab and climbed into my bunk. I had a podcast going, something about basketball, and I was asleep within 10 minutes. I woke up at some point, I don't know the time, I didn't check, because the podcast had stopped. Not paused, not reached the end of an episode. Stopped. My phone's screen was black. I picked it up and it was off, which it shouldn't have been. The battery had been at 60%. I turned it back on and the time said 3:17 and none of my recent apps showed the podcast app as having been open at all, which doesn't make sense. I lay there for a while, and then I heard from the direction of the lava field a voice. Not words, not at first. Just a vocal sound, the quality of a voice coming from somewhere in the black rock. And then it resolved into words, and the words were my name and my father's name spoken together. Joaquin, Ernesto. The exact way my grandmother used to call us both in from the yard, stacked together like that, mine first and then his. My grandmother had been dead for 11 years. I got very cold. The voice said it again, then again. Each repetition was slightly louder. It wasn't getting closer, or if it was getting closer very slowly, but the volume was increasing as if something was simply projecting more. And underneath the voice I became aware of a sound I can only describe as grinding. Not rock settling. Something being dragged slowly across lava rock. A weight being moved. I started the engine. I drove. I know that other truck was still at the far end of the lot when I left. I couldn't see inside the cab, but there were no lights on. I drove away from it, from the lava field, from the voice that knew 2 names it had no business knowing. When I reached Bend and stopped at a 24-hour gas station, I called my dad. It was almost 4 in the morning. He picked up on the second ring. He's a light sleeper. And before I could say anything, he said, "Where are you?" I had a bad feeling. I told him I was fine. I told him the drive was long. I didn't tell him what I'd heard. But when I went to pump my gas, I looked at the side of my truck and saw that the step rail on the passenger side, the metal step below the door, had a handprint on it. In ash. White volcanic ash pressed flat into a full handprint, fingers spread, the palm smaller than mine, old-fashioned. Like something that had been walking on all fours across the lava field had reached the truck, pulled itself up, and pressed one hand against the step to hold its weight. I took a photo of it. I showed my dad a year later when we were talking about other things. He looked at it for a long time and handed my phone back and said, "You don't linger on no-name road." He said it without being smug about it. He was just saying it like it was fact. Story 11. The last time I drove through the panhandle of West Virginia alone was in July, 3 summers ago. I know that sounds like an odd qualifier, the last time I drove through alone specifically, but Nadia has made it clear she will not go with me, and I think honestly she's right about that. I was coming back from visiting my brother Theo in Pittsburgh. It had been a good visit. We'd gone to a Steelers preseason game, which neither of us cared much about, and eaten at a diner he liked, and spent most of Sunday morning sitting on his porch not saying anything in particular. The drive home to Richmond usually takes about 6 hours through the mountains, and I always plan for 7 to leave room for stopping. I stopped at a rest area on Route 9 in West Virginia around 8 in the evening while it was still light, which matters because what I experienced didn't happen in the dark. It was dusk, the kind where the sky is still showing orange at the edge but the forest under it is already in full shadow. The rest area was small, just a small parking lot, a brick bathroom building, a single picnic shelter, and a stand of very tall trees on the eastern side that ran up against a steep hillside. Not threatening, just a rest stop in the mountains at dusk. I parked, got out, stretched, used the bathroom. Bought a water from the machine, which actually worked, which I was grateful about. Ate a small bag of peanuts I'd had in the cup holder since Pittsburgh. I was leaning against the front of my car looking at the hillside when I noticed the shape in the trees. At first I thought it was a large bird. Then I thought it was a trash bag caught in the branches. There was something hanging in the fork of a tall oak about 40 feet up the hill, just at the line where the shadow of the forest stopped, and the last light of dusk began. It was pale. It was roughly the size of a person, maybe larger, and it was moving, not swaying in the wind. Moving. Slowly, deliberately, the way something moves when it's adjusting its position, getting more comfortable. It had its back to me and I could see the shape of a back, the ridge of a spine, the curve of shoulders, and the arms were out to the sides, braced against the branches around it. And the head turned. Slowly, by increments, the way an owl turns, going further than a human neck would go, until it was facing backward, facing me from 40 feet up in a tree at dusk in the mountains of West Virginia. I could not see its face clearly enough to describe it. The light was wrong and the distance was enough. What I could see was the shape of a face, angled toward me, and 2 areas of shadow where the eyes would be, and the absolute stillness that followed the turning of the head. It stopped moving completely. It was looking at me from the tree, and I was looking at it from the parking lot, and the last light was dying around both of us. I got in my car. I didn't rush. Rushing felt wrong, felt like it would trigger something, some response I didn't want to provoke. I got in the way you get in when you're trying to look like you're not leaving, and I drove out at normal speed, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I'd been on the road for 10 minutes. The evidence took me 2 days to find. I'd been home for 2 days when I went to vacuum my car out and found, wedged between the driver's seat and the center console, a single long feather. Not from a bird I recognized, too large for an eagle, too pale, almost white with a faint gray banding, and the shaft was thick in a way that felt wrong in my hand. I don't know how it got there. The windows had been up. The doors had been closed. I put it in a plastic bag and put it in the back of a drawer, and I haven't taken it out, and I don't intend to. Some things you keep because throwing them away feels like it means something. Some things you keep because they're the only proof that what you saw was real. I think about the head turning too far sometimes when I'm on the highway at night. I think about the patience in that stillness after it found me with its face. Like it was used to waiting, like it could afford to. I still stop at rest areas, I just never stop for long. Thanks for watching all the way through. If these stories got under your skin, and I hope a few of them did, hit that like button and subscribe so you're here for the next collection. Drop a comment telling me which story haunted you most, or share it with someone who thinks they don't scare easily. Until next time, pay attention when you pull over out there. Not everything waiting in the dark is waiting for someone else.